would make the worst slaves on the face of the planet.
I was basically a procurement specialist. I bought stuff.
Okay.
That's all I can say.
Microphones and listening devices and
I
stuff
bought
like
stuff,
that.
Steven.
The Emmy-winning comedian who once shared the Oscar stage with Chris Rock and Regina Hall suddenly became the focus of Hollywood, but not for laughter. In May 2005, Wanda surprised audiences by appearing in Monster-in-Law, starring alongside Jennifer Lopez and Jane Fonda. A witty, sarcastic woman, every word she spoke made the whole theater erupt in laughter. But what if everything you thought you knew about one of Wanda's biggest rising stars was just the surface? Few people know that she once returned from the brink of death and was disowned by her own father, forbidden from stepping foot in the house. Wanda's true story will make you wonder, how far can someone go to pursue their dreams, and what sacrifices must they make to be themselves? And that wasn't the biggest shock of her life. That was just the beginning of a journey so intense, it felt like a movie script, with twists and turns you never saw coming. 1. Child of a noble family, but with a difficult start. Queen of comedy. That's what they call Wanda, one of the brightest comedians in American film history. But few know that before achieving success and standing on her own peak, unmatched by anyone. She struggled greatly to build her career. She was even considered a ticking time bomb by her parents, right in their own home. When the whole world later paid to hear Wanda speak, her parents had to pay to buy silence in the past. Born into a military family, where everything is measured by discipline and order, Wanda carried within her the most dangerous thing for any conservative household: a sharp mind and a fearless mouth. She was born on March 7, 1964, in Portsmouth, Virginia. Her father was a lieutenant colonel in the Pentagon, and her mother was a bank employee, two symbols of stability and normalcy. In that house, the dining table was always quiet. Chairs had to be pushed in behind you, and every word had to be proper. In a place where talking too much is considered impolite, Wanda was born to break that silence. She is straightforward and speaks bluntly, sometimes just innocently, but it makes adults frown. Her natural sense of humor made her tell stories in a way that was so heartbreakingly real. Others make people laugh for lightheartedness, while Wanda speaks directly about American politics, race, gender, and morality, a topic that is vulgar and embarrassing in the eyes of adults. From a young age, she caused her parents headaches. Every time guests came over, as soon as Wanda started joking, her mother would immediately give her a warning look, pull her into the kitchen, and press some money into her hand. Go play at your grandmother's house. That's how to preserve the family's image. But it was at that moment that Wanda understood she was an out-of-place detail in that perfectly arranged picture. She's not meant to be displayed, only temporarily hidden. As time passed, Wanda grew up amidst two contrasting lessons. 1. To be honest, it's troublesome. Hi, to play the good child. You have to know how to read your mother's expressions. You have to know how to read your father's countenance. But the older she got, the more she felt that silence was the slowest death. After graduating, Wanda tried to be a normal child. She studied marketing and got a job at the National Security Agency, NSA, a dream job, prestigious, high-paying, and stable. She entered brightly lit offices, meeting bland, boring people. The longer she stayed there, the more Wanda felt like a fish out of water in a clear tank. She once said, "I felt like I was eating white rice with the taxpayers' money. There's nothing fun there, just strange things." People talk about their homes, their children, and their retirement plans. And she just felt bored. And then in 1992, she cut her own safety rope. Wanda left Virginia and moved to New York, where small comedy clubs, thick smoke, and old yellow lights became a sanctuary for those who dared to be different. To her parents, it was madness. Why would you give up a stable government job to make a fool of yourself in public? They asked. But for Wanda, it wasn't rebellion. It was self-preservation. I'd rather fail with laughter than drown in silence. In the early years, Wanda struggled to exhaustion. She performed in terrible bars, earning a few $dozen, sometimes being booed, sometimes having bottles thrown at her. But strangely enough, she had never felt so in the right place. Every time she stepped onto the stage, the lights shone in her face. Silence surrounded her. But this time, it was the silence of people waiting to hear her speak. And she said, with all the frankness that was once considered impertinent, Wanda doesn't speak nicely. She laid bare the contradictions Americans keep hidden in their hearts. You are afraid of black people, yet you worship hip-hop culture. You want our rhythm, but not our blues. That saying is like a slap in the face to a society that is patting itself on the back about freedom. She also satirized the way American media portrays crime. If they're white, they're psychologically disturbed. And if they're black, they're dangerous. It's not just comedy, it's resistance. While her parents taught her to be humble and not touch anyone, Wanda chose to touch an entire country. And it's that very rebelliousness that makes Wanda irreplaceable. In 1997, Chris Rock discovered her during a small performance in New York. He invited her to come work as a screenwriter for The Chris Rock Show on HBO. For Wanda, it was the first time I was able to speak without being pulled out of the room. 2 years later, she won an Emmy for outstanding writing for a variety music or comedy special. The girl who was once hidden away for talking too much is now being honored by the entire United States for turning bluntness into an art form. From then on, Hollywood opened its doors. Wanda stepped onto the big screen with Nutty Professor 2, The Clumps Down-to-Earth Pootie Tang. Her name spread far and wide, and her fame and fortune were no less than what her parents had once dreamed of. But the irony is in their eyes, Wanda is still just the storytelling rebel. Behind the glamour, there's still the little girl who was once dragged out of the living room just for telling the truth. She makes millions of strangers laugh, but still hasn't found a way to make her own parents smile. And perhaps that is the deepest tragedy to be heard by the whole world, yet still unable to make one's loved ones want to listen. 2. The more famous you are, the harder it is to be loved. In real life, she's a star. At home, she was another unacceptable story. Does Wanda ever wonder if after all these years of being true to herself, her parents are still a door she can't walk through? Perhaps there are things even with her fame and age that remain beyond her reach, like unconditional acceptance and love from her own family. In 2004, at the age of 40, Wanda sat in the old kitchen with her parents. You know you can't hide it any longer. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly. I'm a lesbian. The words fell onto the table heavier than silence itself. Her father jumped up, his face flushed. Stop it right now. If you live like that, don't expect acceptance from this family anymore. Her mother said nothing, just looked at her child, then burst into tears. Not because I pity you, but because I can't accept it. In that moment, Wanda found herself back in her childhood, a time when every time she said something slightly different, she was pulled out of the living room. Now, in the midst of adulthood, she is being pulled away from her own life. Parents believe it's an illness. They hired a psychologist to treat her, hoping to cure their unique daughter. Wanda sat in the room listening to people talk about her as a problem, while her father stood outside the door, his eyes serious, trying to control everything. It was a memory that haunted her for life, that in the house she thought was the warmest her true self was considered wrong. That year, Wanda had a stable career, a rising reputation, and solid finances. But as she stepped out of that kitchen, she realized she had just lost the most important thing: family. 4 years later, in 2008, Wanda married Alex, the woman she loved, in California. That was the day she called the most beautiful and loneliest thing in my life. At the banquet table, the 2 chairs for the parents remained completely empty. No blessings, no eyes following. She laughed, raised her glass, took pictures, and then when everything was over, quietly stepped out onto the balcony, looking down at the brightly lit city of Los Angeles. A part of her still wondered, were they watching the news? Did they know their daughter had just gotten married today? The media began to tear it apart. The news, Wanda Sykes comes out as gay and marries Alex Niedbalski, appeared every place in the press, on talk shows, and on social media. Half of America hailed her as a symbol of courage, while the other half attacked her as a traditionalist. Wanda became the focus of a flag, a topic of discussion. They were curious about what big deal their child had made that even the parents couldn't accept, and they asked questions about her deep-seated personality. A few days later, at a protest against Proposition 8, the law banning same-sex marriage in California, she was unexpectedly invited onto the stage. When the host called her name Wanda, even that they were calling Pink or Drew Barrymore. But when the crowd chanted, "Wanda, Wanda," she understood it's time to talk. She held the microphone, her voice deep and clear. "I am not just a supporter, I'm an insider." The crowd erupted. CNN replayed it continuously. "The whole of America knows only her parents turn off the TV." Wanda once said, "I don't see myself as brave. I'm just tired of living as if I don't exist." A seemingly light-hearted saying, but behind it lies a lifetime of suffering. In a country that celebrates freedom, but still draws a clear line between acceptance and endurance. Since the day she went public, her career has taken off like a rocket. The shows sold out, and her name appeared every place on Netflix and HBO. She made millions laugh and inspired hundreds of thousands in the LGBTQ+ community. But the more the world applauded her, the more her family fell silent. The more she was hailed as a brave voice, the lonelier she felt. At parties without her parents by her side, Wanda used humor her whole life to be heard. But there was one audience she could never win over: her parents. For them, Wanda wasn't a symbol of gender equality, not the queen of comedy. She was just a lost daughter going against what they believed was right. If you look deeper, it's a very down-to-earth layer of tragedy. You might be a hero in society, but when you come home, you're still the non-standard one. You can win an Emmy stand under the spotlight, but still not get your own family to accept the simplest thing, that you are who you are. Perhaps that's why middle-aged audiences, those who have clashed with their grandchildren over differences in gender beliefs or lifestyles, see themselves in her. A generation that once believed loving children means molding them to a pattern now has to face the truth that unconditional love is not always easy to learn. Then time passed and the crack didn't disappear, it only faded. Wanda's parents finally changed. They appeared at their grandchildren's birthday party, talked to Alex, and sat and watched their daughter on television without hanging their heads anymore. Wanda said, "They saw me on the Ellen show, and their friends said, 'I like your daughter.' That makes them more open." Sometimes society needs to take a step forward to bring parents closer to their children. However, just when her parents finally began to accept her, Wanda's body decided not to accept her anymore. 3. The day she lost herself. Cut away to live. One of America's wittiest women ever signed a paper allowing doctors to remove a part of her body. With millions of viewers, Wanda Sykes is the queen of comedy, an icon of strength and laughter that transcends all stereotypes. But few know that one day when the stage lights went out, she had to face the most difficult decision of her life, not to protect her reputation, but to save her life. After undergoing a breast reduction surgery, a seemingly simple procedure, the doctor called her back to the clinic. His voice dropped, becoming so serious that even Wanda, who wasn't easily frightened, felt a chill run down her spine. The test results show DCIS, ductal carcinoma, in situ, which means precancerous breast cells. It's not invasive cancer, but if left untreated, it could become real cancer at any time. On the table in front of her were two options: regular monitoring or complete removal of both breasts. Wanda, who spent her life talking about things others avoided, now has to say something she herself isn't ready to face. She joked to break the tension, "Cut it all off. I don't want to play the lottery with cancer." The statement made everyone chuckle, but only Wanda knew it wasn't a joke. It was a survival decision. The surgery went smoothly. The doctor said she was very brave. Fans called her brave, and the press hailed her as a new symbol of female strength. But Wanda said, "No, I'm not brave. I'm just afraid of dying." That answer made many people laugh, but for those who had crossed the boundary between life and death, they understood it was a pure, unadorned, and unpretentious fear. When she was discharged from the hospital, she looked at her body in the mirror, for the first time without laughter, without an audience, without lights. Only her and her new image. The stitches are still swollen, and the skin around the incision is wrinkled. Someone who was once confident on stage now has to relearn their own body, as if they were meeting a stranger with the same face. The bitter irony is that despite being gay, having a wife and children, and speaking about gender equality to the world, Wanda still had to fight the same obsession that millions of women have experienced, losing a part of her body. She had to ask herself, am I still me? It's a very silent layer of tragedy. No noise, no scandals, no tears falling in front of the camera. It smoldered silently and only truly echoed on the nights she lay still listening to her heartbeat. For the first time in her life, she felt it was so weak. She once said in an interview, "They call me brave, but in reality, I'm just trying to keep living." When you're faced with the choice of losing a part of your body or losing everything, you no longer have time to pretend to be strong. That sentence, without needing to be humorous or philosophical, was enough to silence the entire audience. This is a tragedy that many women understand, even if they've never heard the name Wanda Sykes. Because behind cancer, behind the fear of death, lies the loss of physical form and identity. The body, once something they cherished, were proud of, and even used to love, suddenly became a witness to a war no one wanted. Especially for middle-aged women, Wanda's largest audience group, this empathy is even stronger. They've witnessed their bodies change and experienced events that made them feel like they weren't the same as before. When Wanda said, "I'm just afraid of dying," they understood, because they had been afraid like that too. And they too had cut away a part of themselves. Not just flesh, but sometimes dreams, youth, the things they once thought would belong to them forever. But behind that fear, there's still a quiet philosophy sometimes to keep living. You have to trade away the very things you think are you. You have to let a part of the old you disappear to keep the deeper, truer, most primal part, the part that yearns to live. Wanda once recounted the moment after her surgery, when she returned home, and her son asked, "Mom, are you in pain?" She looked at her child and smiled, "No, I'm fine." But that night, when the whole family was asleep, she finally dared to burst into tears. Not because of physical pain, but because for the first time, she felt she had lost something that no one could see. The belief that this body would always be a safe place for her to reside. Since then, Wanda's comedy has changed. She was still joking, still sharp, but there was a somber note in every story. Recalling the event, she said, "We all think we understand our bodies until they betray us." That saying made people chuckle softly, then fall silent for longer than usual. No one sees her as bold anymore. They see her as real. There was no more boisterous laughter, only nods and teary eyes. And perhaps that's when Wanda truly became an artist, when laughter was no longer a weapon, but a way for her to mend the broken pieces of herself. The world calls her a symbol of resilience, a woman who dared to defy fate. But Wanda saw things differently. "I'm not fighting cancer. I'm just trying to live better than yesterday." In that serenity, one could see all the intelligence, bitterness, and pride of someone who had once had to learn to survive without being praised. Wanda's story touches the deepest emotions, not because it's tragic, but because it's so real that there's no room for pretense. She didn't want to be pitied, nor did she need to be honored. She just wants people to understand that in order to survive, sometimes we have to learn to lose. She saved her life, but the blow to her faith came later. Not from the illness, but from the very profession that had once been her salvation. When she realized that sometimes entertainment isn't healing at all, but only hides scars. And from here, Wanda begins a new journey to rediscover why she once loved laughter so much. 4. When laughter became a burden, Oscar night should be a celebration of professionals. A place that celebrates art, celebrates laughter, where the whole world looks to Hollywood as a symbol of glamour and power. But for Wanda Sykes, that night was the moment she realized this career is not on her side. In 2022, Wanda was one of the 3 hosts of the 94th Academy Awards ceremony, along with Amy Schumer and Regina Hall. It should have been one of the most glorious nights of her career, millions watching live prestigious stars, and the stage every comedian dreams of standing on. But just a few minutes after she introduced Chris Rock to the stage, an unexpected incident caused the entire ceremony to take a different turn. Will Smith walked onto the stage, slapped Chris Rock in the middle of the lights in front of thousands of spectators and millions watching live around the world. The air stilled. Wanda recounted that at the time she was backstage seeing everything, that no one in the audience understood what was happening. The crew was chaotic, the director kept calling over the walkie-talkie, and the backstage staff were running around in disarray. But a few minutes later, everything continued. No one was asked to leave, and no one was asked to pause the program. Everyone forced a laugh, clapped, and then the show went on as if nothing had happened. Wanda said that when she saw Will Smith still sitting there, still smiling, and still being invited to accept an award, she felt physically pained. It wasn't because of the slap, but because of the silence of an entire room full of powerful people. In subsequent talk shows, she emphasized something that seemed very simple. If you slap someone, you have to be asked to leave. That's all. The sentence sounds ordinary at first, but it's a subtle accusation against the system. No one asked her to apologize, but no one officially apologized to her either. The whole world is talking about Will, Jada, and Chris, about pain, honor, and apologies. But few people ask, how did the three MCs that night, the ones who had to keep the show going, feel? For a comedian who makes a living by maintaining a balanced atmosphere, having their show ruined and still having to laugh it off is not just annoying, it's a subtle form of insult. Wanda said that when she walked out of the auditorium, she felt nauseous. She saw the pretense in the remaining laughter. Everyone wants to appear normal, but we all know nothing is normal anymore. What traumatized Wanda wasn't just the violence, but the complicity of silence. She's experienced many collisions in her life, being told to be quiet by her parents, being told by society, don't be too sensitive. And now, at the peak of her career, she's hearing a different version of that, just keep acting, this is good for ratings. A cycle of silence disguised by a smile. The system doesn't need to know who is injured, it just needs to show without interruption. For Wanda, it was the second slap in the face, not from a man, but from the entire industry she had dedicated her life to. She said, I feel like I'm not protected. I can't believe they let him sit there, enjoy the rest of the show, and receive an award. Behind that statement lies the bitterness of someone who once believed in the justice of the profession. This profession has brought her fame, but it has also forced her to accept wrongdoings in order to survive within it. This is the final blow in Wanda's series of professional tragedies, from a child told to be quiet in a military home, to a woman told, don't be too sensitive, when fighting for her gender, and finally being told by the very industry she loves to stay silent for the good of the show. The more people clapped, the more she realized that laughter was no longer a joy, but a burden. On stage, Wanda can make the whole audience burst into laughter. But backstage, she knew exactly what she had to do. I have to make the audience feel comfortable, even when I see everything is wrong. Laughter, once her strongest weapon, had now become a shackle. It bound her to a role the system expected, humorous, cheerful, and uncomplaining. While the world praised her stage presence, no one knew that inside she was exhausted from pretending everything was fine. The Oscars night, which should have been the pinnacle, became a painful reminder. Sometimes success isn't a reward, but a test of endurance. Wanda walked out of that awards ceremony not with a halo, but with the realization that this profession, this audience, and this entire system had never truly been on her side. When asked if she would forgive Will Smith later, Wanda just smiled and said gently, I was never angry with him. I'm just disappointed with the whole room. A seemingly simple saying, but it reveals a truth sometimes. What hurts people isn't wrong actions, but the way the world chooses to pretend not to see them. And then, as Wanda stepped off that noisy stage, she understood one thing. From now on, if you laugh, you'll laugh for yourself, not for the system. Because in a world where everyone is trying to maintain an image, daring to truly feel, even just once, is already an act of courage. 5. The woman who lives between laughter and silence. At 61, Wanda Sykes appears less often. It wasn't because she had nothing left to say, but because she had finally learned how to be silent at the right times. After more than 3 decades of living on stage where laughter was once a weapon, silence is now how she maintains her own peace. Her small house in Pennsylvania had no stage lights, no audience. In the morning, his wife, Alex, was vaping on the porch, the 2 children were running around the yard, and Wanda was standing in the kitchen making coffee. A scene so ordinary, it's hard to believe, considering this woman once sparked a national debate in the US just for daring to live authentically. Perhaps after all, Wanda is just a mother, a wife, a human being who has weathered too many storms and now just wants to breathe a little easier. She still performs, but she no longer appears frequently on major television shows. Instead of relying on ratings and editing, Wanda chose the stand-up format on Netflix, where she had the freedom to write, speak, and control herself. There, she didn't need to please the broadcaster, didn't need to control every word to avoid controversy. She just needs to be Wanda, exactly the way audiences have loved, feared, and respected her. In the show I'm an Entertainer, she threw out statements that sounded like jokes but were full of bitterness. I'm not in this profession to make you happy. I do it to keep from going crazy. A punchline that made the audience roar with laughter, but then fell silent after a few seconds. Because everyone understands, it's not just a joke. That's how Wanda survived. Laughter was never just joy for her. It's therapy. It's armor. It's the only language that helped her survive in a world that once wanted her silenced. She's no longer trying to make everyone like her. After decades of public scrutiny, Wanda understood that some things cannot be forced. You cannot make someone love you if they are afraid of your true self. So instead of pleasing the audience, she returned to the original motif, talking about uncomfortable things by making people laugh. She no longer seeks acceptance, but only chooses freedom. On stage, Wanda still satirized America, the country she loved, but which also hurt her the most. She talked about politics, about racism, about gender bias, about the things people try to avoid. And the strange thing is the audience is still laughing. Perhaps they've changed, or perhaps they're tired of pretending. Wanda no longer has to fight to be heard. Now laughter finds her on its own, because it knows this is true laughter. Looking back, Wanda's tragedy didn't end in ruin. It ends with active acceptance. She didn't wait for the Oscars to apologize for how they handled the Will Smith incident. She didn't wait for society to become less divided, or for people to stop criticizing her community. She also no longer needed her parents to understand her completely, because sometimes peace doesn't come from others changing, but from us stopping hoping they will. Wanda chose to continue living with the person she loved, raising her child, with the honesty she never received. She chose to continue telling the truth, but in her own way. Lighter, deeper, less harsh, but still true to the core. And above all, she chose to let those who needed her laughter come to her, rather than having to run around seeking recognition. Someone asked, "Don't you feel sad that fewer people mention your name now?" Wanda laughed. "I don't need everyone to remind me. I just need the person I love to call me home." An answer that was enough to silence anyone who had followed her journey. Because the woman who once fought with words ultimately triumphed through silence. At 61, Wanda's happiness no longer lies on posters and sold-out shows or in media praise. Her happiness lies in being able to sleep peacefully every night, not in thinking about what to say in the morning to make others happy. It lies in her being able to live by her choices, without needing permission, without needing to apologize. Wanda once said, "I used to think I needed to prove something. Now I just need to prove that I'm still okay." And that is perhaps the greatest success, when a woman who was once forced to smile by the whole world finally learned to smile for herself. They call her life a tragedy. Perhaps that's true. But for Wanda, if she had to choose between being loved for a false version of herself and being hated for who she truly is, she made her choice a long time ago. And that perhaps isn't a tragedy, but freedom.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.